1885. Remember that? A railroad crew is blasting limestone bluffs along the Osage River, 20 miles upstream from a dam that doesn't exist yet and won't for another 46 years. They're not looking for anything. They're cutting a bridge approach through solid rock, contract work and a routine job. Then the blast opens the wall and there's a cave behind it. Passages wide enough to walk through. Chambers running back into the bluff where the light doesn't reach. And inside, bones, not scattered, arranged. The Jefferson City Tribune ran the story on September 3rd, 1885. A 33-inch femur. A skull circumference of 29 inches is noted. I want you to hold both of those numbers, because we're going to come back to them. Standard human proportions don't produce either measurement. Not even close. I wasn't looking for this. I was trying to understand why a military engineering division controls recreational lakes across the Ozarks. That question pulled me into county records, Army Corps memos, State Geological Survey files, and eventually into newspaper archives from the 1880s. That's where I found the Tribune account. And once I found it, I couldn't put it down. Because the bones from that cave went to the Smithsonian Institution, and there is no record of what happened after that. That detail becomes important later. The Tribune account isn't folklore, it's a named publication, a date, and dimensions recorded by workers, men with no reason to fabricate measurements and every reason to report accurately to their employer. The article describes a cave chamber that showed signs of artificial enlargement. The bones weren't the remains of people who died in a cave. They were placed there, deliberately. The arrangement is noted specifically in the Tribune's account. A 33-inch femur is roughly double the length of an adult male femur, which runs 17 to 18 inches. The skull circumference of 29 inches sits 6 to 7 inches outside the normal adult range. A femur that length scaled against standard skeletal proportions suggests a standing height of approximately 9 feet. These aren't marginal outliers, they're a different category of measurement entirely. The Missouri Historical Society was contacted. Representatives arrived at the site. The bones were collected for examination. This is documented institutional involvement, not amateur handling by curious locals. The chain of custody is clear up to this point. Bones were found, dimensions recorded, institution notified, and specimens collected. Then the chain breaks. Per the Society's own records, the bones were transferred to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis. No accession number for these specimens surfaces in any publicly available Smithsonian catalogue. No published analysis exists. No returned specimens. The trail ends the moment the bones cross the Missouri state line. That's not an assumption. That's what the record shows when you follow it. What also doesn't happen is equally important. The cave is not excavated further. No follow-up survey. No site protection. The chamber that produced a 33-inch femur sits in the Osage River bluffs for the next 4 decades. Untouched, unstudied, open to the river and the weather. I'm not saying the Smithsonian buried this deliberately. I want to be precise about that. But the chain of custody ends the moment the bones leave Missouri, and there is not a letter, not a catalogue entry, not a single published line confirming they were ever examined. That's the gap, not a theory, a gap in the documented record. The cave sits 20 miles upstream from where Bagnall Dam will be built in 1931. Hold that detail too. Because in 1903, after the Tribune ran its account, a farmer named Thomas Clarkson was digging a root cellar on his property. He's 2 feet down when his shovel hits stone. Not bedrock, fitted stone, cut and laid by someone. He starts digging. What he uncovers is a chamber, 10 feet square, an 8-foot ceiling, and walls of limestone, meaning the stone was cut and shaped before it was laid. This isn't a natural formation, and it isn't rough field work. Somebody built this deliberately underground and then sealed it. Clarkson writes to the Missouri state geologist. In it, he describes the chamber dimensions, the construction, and what he found inside. 3 skeletons, all of them, in his words, of gigantic stature. The largest of the 3 measures, 8 feet, 7 inches. He documents copper artifacts alongside the remains, including what he describes as a blade or tool weighing approximately 12 pounds. That detail, the 12-pound copper blade, deserves more attention. Copper tools from pre-Columbian North America exist, and are well documented across the Great Lakes region and into the Mississippi Valley. But a 12-pound blade isn't a utility object for a person of normal proportions. The weight alone makes it impractical. It's scaled to something larger. You don't carry 12 pounds of copper as a working tool, unless the person carrying it is built to match. The Missouri state geologist visits the site in 1904. His report, filed with the State Geological Survey, is a careful document. He acknowledges the chamber construction and the skeletal dimensions. His language stays precise. Unexpected sophistication, considerably larger than average, indeterminate age. He doesn't dismiss what Clarkson found, but his conclusions go nowhere. The report is filed. No excavation permit is issued. No site boundary is established. No follow-up assessment is commissioned. The bones are collected by the state geologist's office. The artifact custody log records their transfer to the Smithsonian Institution for further analysis. Same destination as the 1885 specimens. And after that, same result. No published analysis surfaces. No accession number appears in public Smithsonian records. The custody log entry is the last documented trace of Clarkson's copper blade, of those 3 sets of remains and of anything that came out of that chamber. The chamber itself stays in the ground. Clarkson farms around it for the next 25 years. Nobody excavates it. Nobody maps what else it might contain beyond what Clarkson's initial dig exposed. The State Geological Survey knows it's there. The Smithsonian has the specimens. Then, in 1929, Union Electric begins acquiring land along the Osage River under eminent domain. The Bagnall Dam project needs that valley. Clarkson's farm is purchased. The family relocates, and in 1931, when the dam closes and the reservoir starts filling, the stone chamber, dressed limestone walls, 8-foot ceiling, whatever else it held beyond what Clarkson pulled out goes under. It's now beneath approximately 100 feet of water in what we call Lake of the Ozarks. The custody log shows transfer to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian shows nothing back. It has never been excavated. No archaeologist has formally studied the structure. No inventory exists of its full contents. What strikes me about Clarkson's case specifically isn't just the skeletal dimensions or the copper artifacts. It's the gap between what the state geologist's report acknowledges and what anyone actually did about it. The sophistication of the chamber was noted. The scale of the remains was noted. The indeterminate age was noted. All of it was noted, transferred, and then quietly absorbed into institutional silence while the site sat waiting for water that arrived right on schedule. 3 files, 3 transfers, 3 silences. The Missouri Spelological Survey isn't a group of weekend hobbyists with lanterns and curiosity. It's an organized institutional effort. Researchers conducting systematic documentation of cave systems across the state, producing published reports that enter the formal scientific record. Their 1922 report is a primary document, not a newspaper account, not a letter from a farmer, a published institutional survey with named researchers, site coordinates and measurements recorded under professional standards. What they find in 1921, in the White River cave system near what is now the deepest section of Table Rock Lake, is a burial chamber. 7 individuals, every one of them exceeds normal skeletal proportions by a margin that the survey's own language can't minimize. The smallest skeleton in the chamber measures 7 feet 4 inches. The largest one measures 9 feet 1 inch. The survey records both figures. They're in the published report. The chamber itself is the part that stopped me when I first read the survey's description. The walls had been smoothed, not worn smooth by water or time, worked smooth, deliberately by tools, and the ceiling showed corbelling. That's a specific construction technique, where stones are layered so each course projects slightly inward, closing the space overhead without a keystone. It doesn't happen by weathering. It doesn't happen by accident. Somebody built that ceiling with an understanding of how stone distributes load. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. The artifacts recovered from the chamber include copper tools and carved stone objects. The survey cannot attribute them to any known regional culture. That sentence is worth sitting with, because the researchers writing it have access to the full catalogue of documented regional archaeology. They're not saying the objects are unusual by casual standards. They're saying the objects don't fit any established cultural framework they can reference. That's a published institutional admission of an unexplained find, written by people with professional credibility and no obvious motive to exaggerate. The survey's recommendation, filed in 1922, calls for a multi-year study. They propose systematic documentation of all White River cave sites, not just this chamber, but the full network of limestone formations running through the drainage. The recommendation is specific, funded with a rationale, and supported by the evidence in their published report. That study is never funded. No excavation permits are issued for any White River cave site following the 1922 report. No follow-up institutional survey picks up where the Missouri Spelological Survey left off. The recommendation sits in the archive exactly as it was filed, untouched, while the sites it describes remain open to anyone willing to go in and look for a while longer anyway. In 1941, the Army Corps of Engineers proposed the Table Rock Dam project. Construction begins in 1954. By 1958, the White River Valley is flooding, and every cave site the Missouri Spelological Survey documented goes under. The core-built burial chamber with 7 skeletons, the unattributed copper tools, the carved stone objects are in no regional catalogue. All of it is submerged beneath what becomes Table Rock Lake. Federal law at that point doesn't require cultural resource assessment before dam construction. There's no legal mechanism forcing a rescue excavation, no mandate to pull the materials out before the water rises. The pre-dam salvage archaeology gap isn't a loophole someone exploited, it's just an absence. No law, no requirement, no excavation. I'm not saying this was targeted, I want to be precise. The survey recommended further study in 1922. No study happened. By 1958, the sites were permanently unreachable. That sequence doesn't require intent to produce an outcome that is identical to intent. The caves are still there. Same limestone, same chambers, same corbelled ceilings. Just under 200 feet of water now. 3 sites, 3 sets of specimens transferred to the Smithsonian. 3 locations are now sitting under between 100 and 200 feet of water. The timeline compression is what I keep coming back to. 1885 discovery, 1931 flooding, 1903 discovery, 1931 flooding, with no public record of analysis. 1921 survey recommendation, 1941 dam proposal, 1958 flooding. You can map those dates against each other, and the spacing feels almost administrative. Find, collect, wait, flood. Not rushed, not panicked, just steady and sequential. The Army Corps pre-construction surveys for Truman Lake, conducted between 1970 and 1974, are publicly available documents. Most people have never looked at them. One site report near the current dam location describes a rectangular stone foundation, approximately 40 by 60 feet, showing construction techniques. The surveyors cannot attribute to any known historical settler activity in the region. The same report notes that preliminary excavation revealed, and I'm quoting directly here, skeletal remains of unusual size in proximity to the structure. It then states that further investigation wasn't possible due to project timeline constraints. The materials collected from the site were transferred to Army Corps storage for potential future analysis. There is no public record of that analysis ever happening. FOIA requests filed for pre-flood archaeological collections data from Army Corps projects across the Ozark region return consistent language. Records incomplete, materials lost in storage, reorganizations, information withheld. That consistency is its own kind of document. The suppression mechanism here isn't theatrical. There's no moment of decision, no meeting where someone orders the evidence destroyed. What there is instead is a convergence of institutional interests that didn't need to coordinate because they were all pulling in the same direction. The Army Corps needed to build on schedule. The Smithsonian received specimens it didn't publish. State geological offices filed cautious reports and moved their staff on to other projects. No single actor needed to issue an order. The result was the same regardless. Now go back to the 2 details I asked you to hold at the start. The Smithsonian received the 1885 bones and published nothing. The cave that produced them sat 20 miles upstream from Bagnell Dam. Both of those facts were isolated curiosities when I first pulled them out of the Tribune archive. They don't stay isolated when you put them next to Clarkson's chamber, the 1922 survey recommendation, and the Truman Lake site report with its careful phrase about unusual size. What looked like a single administrative gap in 1885 is, across 5 decades and 4 reservoir projects, a wall. The railroad crew that opened that cave in 1885 had no idea what they'd found. They were cutting a bridge approach. The bones they uncovered went to the Missouri Historical Society, then to the Smithsonian, and the record closed. The caves they mapped are still in the White River limestone. Same chambers, same corbelled ceilings, the survey described in careful institutional language, just unreachable now, sealed under sediment and 200 feet of still water that the Army Corps of Engineers manages and controls. The documentation survived, the evidence didn't. 3 files, 3 transfers, 3 silences.